Two short poems by Jalaluddin Rumi, the 13th century Sufi poet. I am the soul in 100,000 bodies. What is the soul? What is a body? I am both. And there is someone else I am as well. In order to please that one, I put on various personalities. I say my lines. Never read that in public before, but it seems true today. I am the soul in 100,000 bodies. What is the body? What is the soul? I am both. And there is someone else as well that I am. In order to please that one, I put on various personalities. I say my lines. And here is Rumi's invitation to all, that is all cultures, all religions, in his community. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, come. This is not a caravan of despair. It does not matter that you have broken your vow 1,000 times, still come, and yet again come. Whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving, come. This is not a caravan of despair. It does not matter that you have broken your vow 1,000 times, still come, and yet again come.
Creator, the great Holy Spirit speaks to us through the wind, sacred breath, and I know I count myself blessed every time I see the sacred wind moving through the trees, speaking to the leaves and speaking to me through the leaves. And I want to share with you a Cherokee prayer for that sacred breath. Yehovah, 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 Adadoi Unole Adadolisti Unole Adadolisti Unole Adadolisti. Unole
sake, lead me.
Yea, though in
Valley
shame that shall may walk,
none will I fear, because thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff my comfort are. For me a table thou hast spread in presence of my foes. Thou dost anoint my head with oil, my cup it overflows. Goodness and mercy surely shall all my days follow me. And in the Lord's house I shall dwell so long, so long, so long as days shall be. The Lord unto me a shepherd is.
Good evening. Now, what a pleasure to be in this beautiful church. And Brother Cosby, thank you for letting us be here. It says on this program that I'm an author and an educator and environmentalist, which I guess is true, but I'm also a Methodist Sunday school teacher. Now, I live in Vermont, back in the woods, and our little tiny church would fit 15 times over in this glorious sanctuary. And I should confess that I'm a little nervous being here because of its grandeur and because of the fact that I really have never risen any higher in the ecclesial hierarchy than Sunday school teacher. And here we are surrounded by rabbis and imams and preachers of all stripe. And if truth be told, all you really have to, it's not like there's a high level of theological education required in our church for becoming a Sunday school teacher. The general test is, on Christmas Eve, can you take a tea towel and turn a fourth grader into a Palestinian shepherd? And if you can, then you are more or less in. And so that's really my main qualification. So I would be very worried to be coming here, except that when you come to a new place, it helps to have information about that place, to kind of know. And I know a little bit about Louisville, and the reason that I do is because I was in jail this summer. I organized, sort of helped put together the largest civil disobedience action that we've had in this country in about 35 years. And there were 1,253 of us arrested over the course of a couple of weeks outside the White House, trying to persuade our president to block this pipeline that will bring oil down out of Canadian wilds. And when they put us in jail, I spent 3 days in Central Cell Block in D.C. They did not ask us who we wished to be in a cell with. They told us who we would be in a cell with. And that was very nice for me because my cell companion turned out to be a native of this town, Kurt Morrison. he was above me in a very small cage that we shared, and there really isn't that much to do when you're in jail. So we talked a good deal. Now, he ran a political blog here in Louisville, so I have a great deal of information about everything that goes on behind the scenes in this city. And it makes me feel as if I'm well armed. I can stand up here and speak, and you won't object because I might have some inside piece of knowledge. So that they're armored, I will begin. Let me say that this Festival of Faiths is something I've heard about from a distance, and I'm so happy to be a part of, especially this year when the topic is the air, the sacred air around us that we all breathe. And I'm afraid that I'm going to begin for a minute just giving you bad news about that air. I wrote the first book 22 years ago about what we then called the greenhouse effect and what we now call climate change. 22 years ago, we knew most of what we needed to know, that when you burn coal and gas and oil, you put carbon in the atmosphere, and that the molecular structure of that carbon traps heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. The only thing we didn't know 22 years ago was how hard and fast this was going to pinch, and the story of those 2 decades is it's pinching harder and faster than we had feared, even at our worst. I could talk at great length about what's going on, but let me give you one powerful example about what's happening to our air. When you raise the temperature, warm air holds more water vapor than cold. If you want one sign of our times, one way to understand what's happening to creation in this century, that is it. The air, because we raised the temperature of the planet about 1 degree so far by burning all that coal and gas and oil, the air is about 4% wetter on average than it was 40 years ago, 4% more humid. That may not sound like much to you, but trust me, it scares scientists to the core, because that number, that humidity in the atmosphere, hadn't budged for the 10,000 years before, the 10,000 years that we've risen as a civilization. And now it's rising fast, and what that means is that in dry and arid areas you get more drought, and we're seeing more drought. We saw it last year in Russia, we see it this year in Texas, where it's worse than in the Dust Bowl. And the result of that, among other things, is that the yield of grain and other crops begins to fall. And so the price of that food goes up. The price of grain is about 70% higher than it was just a few years ago, which means that all over this world tonight, there are people eating far less than they want to be eating. The number of hungry people on this earth has risen by 200 or 250 million in the last 2 years as this temperature warms and as the climate begins to unravel. Once that water has evaporated up into the atmosphere, it is going to come down. And it is coming down in deluge and downpour and flood all over the planet. We're seeing events that remind us only of the story of Noah. No other, because there have been no other floods of this size that we know about. Last year, it was Pakistan. In the part of the Khyber Pass up at the top of the mountains up there that normally get 3 feet of rain a year, they got 12 feet of rain in a week. And the Indus River swelled to the point where 20% of the country was underwater and 20 million people were out of their homes. Then it was Australia, Queensland at Christmas time. Then it was the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers this spring. My state in Vermont took it on the chin 6 weeks ago when the end of Hurricane Irene came up our way. And we broke every rainfall record we had ever had. And you might have seen pictures of covered bridges that had stood there for 200 years, washing away down those swollen rivers. Tonight, while we're here enjoying this beautiful and comfortable and safe place, tonight, if you're in Accra in Ghana, they're having the worst flooding they have ever had. There are people dying. If you are in Central America, you've just come through some of the worst flooding ever recorded there. Hundreds of people dead, roads and bridges gone. If you're in Thailand, in Bangkok, in one of the great cities of the world, in one of the centers of the Buddhist tradition, That place is underwater tonight because they've had more rain than they've ever had before. There is a change in the air, and that change is bad news. And it's not, as it says on the insurance policy, an act of God. This is not God doing this to us. God told us at the end of the last flood that he had put a rainbow in the sky as a sign that there would be, at his hands, no more events like that. But at our hands, yes, this is an act of human beings. So that's the bad news. Here's the good news. There's a change of another kind in the air, too. And that change is a change of people beginning finally to stand up and say, we cannot do this anymore. We must do something different. Let me just tell you a story for a moment about my work in the last couple of years. Because I'm not an activist by nature, though that's what I've become. I'm a writer by nature. Writers like to sit at home in their rooms and type. They do not like to get up and talk. But that's what I've been doing. Because at a certain point we figured out that if the only currency that was being spent in this world was the money currency, then the oil companies and the coal companies would always win this fight because they have a lot of it. Exxon announced its profits last week, its quarterly profits, $10 billion last quarter alone, more money than any company had ever made in the history of money. There are better theologians in this room than me, but I think that's more money than God has, you know? And so if we're going to do anything about this, we're going to have to find other currencies to work in. Passion and creativity and spirit and our bodies sometimes have to be put on the line. We started a thing 3 years ago called 350.org, a campaign that took its name from a scientific data point. Our greatest climatologist, Jim Hansen at NASA, and his team put out a paper saying we know enough about carbon in the air, we know enough about the air to know how much carbon is too much. Any value for carbon in the atmosphere greater than 350 parts per million is not compatible with the planet on which civilization developed and to which life on Earth is adapted. That is strong language for scientists to use. It is stronger when you know that wherever you are today, in Kentucky or in Korea, the atmosphere outside is 393 parts per million CO2, already way too high. That's why Pakistan drowns and Texas burns and the Arctic melts. So we took that number and we chose it, not because it's so great to try to rally around a data point, you know, it's not as good as I have a dream, but because one of the problems with trying to mount a global campaign is everybody around the world insists on speaking their own language, and that makes it hard to communicate. It is a babble out there. And yet Arabic numerals are the one thing, and maybe musical notation, that cross those linguistic boundaries and that we all can understand, and that 350 meant the same thing everywhere. And so we started out to see if we could build a movement, and we had no right to expect that we could. There were me and 7 undergraduates at the liberal arts college where I teach in Vermont. 7. We had no money. 7 was a good number, though, because there are 7 continents. So each one of these kids took one, and we went to work. The guy who got the Antarctic also had to do the internet, because it's sort of its own, you know, continent. And off we went to work. And it was a mustard seed effort, it must be said. There was no reason to expect that we'd be able to strike a chord, but we tried, and we went around the world. We did training camps for young people, and one in Turkey, and for Central Asia, and one in the Caribbean. I remember one in Johannesburg, where we brought 1 or 2 young people from each country in Africa down there, and most had never left their country before or been on an airplane, but they were born organizers, and they all went off across the world and did what they could. And we'd said, we're going to take one day, October 24th, 2009, so just about exactly 2 years ago, was the kind of coming out party for this effort to try to take this number and put it into the information bloodstream of the world. And we had no idea if it would work, but we got a sense that it might. 2 days early. I'm going to show one of these pictures in just a second here. We were sitting around our little borrowed office in Lower Manhattan, all looking at our laptops and doing press releases, when the phone rang, and on the other end was a 17-year-old girl from Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, one of these girls that we'd trained, and Johannesburg. And she was in tears. She said, the government took away our permit for Saturday. We can't do our action then like we'd planned. We're doing it today, so they can't stop us. We are so sorry to be jumping the gun. We don't want to spoil it for everybody else. We wanted to do it with the same time as the whole rest of the world. And there are 18,000 young people out in the street right now chanting 350. And there's a few of them. So I said, Lily, it's okay about the date. Don't worry about it too much. And then after that, for the next 72 hours, it was just amazing. There were 5,100 of these demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea. CNN said it was the most widespread day of political action in the planet's history. If you can just flip through a few of those up there, those are US soldiers in Afghanistan going there. They sort of went around the world as the sun went around the world. Keep moving there. And one of the things I just want to make clear, and especially this next picture will start to do it, I have heard in much of my life that environmentalism is something that rich white people engage in, and that if you had to earn your daily bread every day and were worried about where your next meal was coming from, it would be a luxury you could not afford. This turns out to be nonsense. You can keep moving there. Most of the people that we work with around the world turn out to be black, brown, Asian, poor, young, because that's what most of the world is. And absolutely as concerned about the future as anybody else, mostly because the future is pressing down harder on you if you live in those places and in those categories. Now, it was a beautiful day, and there was all kinds of great art and creativity, and it spanned every corner of the world. And we've done 2 more of them since, getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we've gone on. That's from the Space Needle in Seattle. Bigger and bigger and bigger as we've gone on. We'll need them to grow even larger in size as we go forward. But we're beginning to make real and powerful progress. People beginning to understand that the time to act is now. And one of the reasons for that is a growing involvement of faith communities in this work for the first time. And that's absolutely essential. Stop right there for a minute. That picture is of the huge multi-faith march across the African city of Cape Town. And you see in the front there the head of Muslim South Africa, next to him the leader of indigenous traditions, behind in the scarlet Archbishop Tutu's successor as Anglican Archbishop of South Africa at the head of a huge multi-faith march. The next picture is of a Pentecostal school in Ghana. The next picture of Wheaton College, Billy Graham's alma mater, the most important evangelical liberal arts college in the country. And this picture, next picture will just stop and end there, is a picture from the Middle East. I'd been to Bethlehem to do some organizing, not an easy place to get to. But the Dead Sea is shrinking very fast as temperatures rise, and people wanted to do something. There were too many military checkpoints and things in the way for everyone to work at the same time. But the Jordanians said, we'll make a giant 3 on our beach of the Dead Sea. And the Palestinians said, in Palestine, we will make the 5. And the Israelis said, we'll take care of the 0. On our beach, we'll come together to demonstrate that as we face the biggest problem we've ever faced on this planet, a problem that threatens to get completely out of control and engulf the whole earth, we will rise above our other differences and go to work. And that rising above differences, that I think above all else is what this few days is about and what this whole effort is about. This is the first truly global problem that human beings have ever faced. The one thing that is true about all of us is that we breathe the same undifferentiated air that passes around this narrow envelope of atmosphere in which we reside. This is the world over which God gave us dominion, and that is a horrible and tough responsibility, that dominion. It is not license, it is responsibility. If you give your babysitter dominion over your children for the evening, you do not expect to come home and find your children with 6 tattoos and a nose ring, okay? God has given us dominion, and it is time for us to take seriously, far more seriously than we've taken it in the past, that charge. And some of that taking it seriously may mean, on occasion, being willing to go to jail or to do the other kind of things that in all the great movements that people have had to develop over the years, they've had to be willing to do. I can just say that it gives me enormous strength for the weeks ahead. We're in the middle of this huge political battle over this pipeline. We'll be circling the White House on Sunday with thousands and thousands of people. I just say it gives me great, great strength to be here, to know that across our faith traditions, people are finally beginning to come together and to stand up for the creation that we've been given. It was a gift, but that gift comes with great responsibility. And what a pleasure to see that it's beginning to be taken seriously. Thank you.
Closing benediction are sacred words from John F. Kennedy, who trumpeted an environmentalist theme right after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And John F. Kennedy said, in hopes of creating a new global environment, said in a speech, the reason that we should work in peace with the Soviet Union is because we occupy the same planet. We breathe the same sacred air, and we are all mortal. Benjamin Mays, the mentor of Dr. King, speaking of the fierce urgency of now, said this: we only have a minute, only 60 seconds in it. Forced upon us, can't refuse it, didn't seek it, didn't choose it, but it's up to us to use it. We will suffer if we lose it, give account if we abuse it. Only a tiny little minute, but eternity is in it. May God bless you. Thank you.